let's talk about some of the mythology of various demons and other supernatural entities. This next section will be just that. And if you're really interested in Lucifer or Satan, they're in here, but they will be at the end. If you hadn't had a chance to listen to the previous episodes, like the conversations with Brandon Foreman or Brian Recker, make sure to add those to your queue. They're not necessary for this episode, they just have some good content that may fill in the gaps. When most people think of demons, they picture something that Hollywood has cooked up. Horns, flames, maybe a villainous monologue or two. But the truth is far more interesting and a lot weirder. Demons and spirits have been popping up across cultures and time periods in some truly unexpected ways. Take ancient Egypt, for instance. There's a spell recorded in Amia that was used to drive out a demon who apparently had taken up residence in the uterus. That's right, not a haunted house, not an accursed tomb. No, the uterus. Because what better way to explain menstrual pain or infertility in the ancient world than to blame a demonic squatter? It's a stark reminder that before OBGYNs, we had exorcists. And this idea of spirits and demons gets even more complicated, especially once you throw colonialism into the mix. In 19th century southern Africa, a scholar named Musa Dub dissected the translation choices made in the Setswana Bible. In his paper, brilliantly titled "Consuming a Colonial Cultural Bomb," he points out how missionaries translated the word Badimo, a term referring to revered ancestral spirits, as demons. Yeah. Not only is that a terrible translation fail, it also served as a subtle but insidious tool of cultural imperialism. Imagine telling an entire community that their grandmother's spirit, who they've been offering food to and talking to for generations, is actually a minion of Satan. It didn't quite have the intended effect. Instead of shunning their traditional beliefs, many just reinterpreted Christian rituals through the lens of Badimo, essentially remixing Christianity with ancestral spirituality. Cultural fundamental imperialism, 0. Indigenous resilience, 1. And this wasn't just a one-off. Similar linguistic power plays happened across colonialized regions, from Portuguese-occupied parts of Africa to the Philippines. Translation was never neutral. It was, and often still is, a theological Trojan horse, a way to assert the white man's ideologies so as to subvert the indigenous people's land, culture, and resources. But perhaps one of the most fascinating and eerie examples of early demon depiction comes not from a Bible or a folktale, but from a massive wooden sculpture, the Shigir idol. Discovered in Russia in 1894 and redated in 2018, this haunted artifact is over 11,600 years old, which makes it more ancient than the Stonehenge and older than any known pyramid. Standing at 17 feet tall and carved with 7 human-like faces, it's possibly the oldest depiction of spirits, possibly malevolent, crafted by early hunter-gatherers fresh out of the Ice Age. I mean, imagine surviving the most brutal glaciation in history, and someone in your tribe says, "Hey, Let's carve creepy faces into this giant log to make sure the spirits don't come back. Peak prehistoric anxiety. But also, early evidence of the human instinct to spiritualize fear, nature, and the unknown. Now, according to our ever-reliable friend Wikipedia, there are a whopping 273 named demons across various mythologies and eschatological traditions. That's a lot of paperwork for the afterlife. These include spirits from Jewish, Christian, Islamic, Hindu, and Zoroastrian traditions, each with their own quirks and job descriptions. Some specialize in temptation, others focus more on pestilence, madness, or apparently gynecological issues. Although 273 named demons to me seems like a lowball number. In Christian demonology, according to Alonso de Espina in 1467, claimed there was 133,316,666 different demons, which was based on an interpretation that 1/3 of angels fell from heaven. I imagined end-time theorists today are salivating at the idea that Espina's estimation has the elusive 666 number in it. In 1583, Johann Weyer estimated 4,439,622 different demons, grouped into, you guessed it, 666 legions, each containing 6,666 demons, and led by 66 ruling infernal nobles. Let's dive deeper, beyond the fire and brimstone of Sunday school, and into the messy, mythic, often misunderstood world of demonology, and start with Lilith. Her roots go all the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, where she's mentioned as a wind spirit, Lilitu in Sumerian. Over time, she evolved, or maybe devolved, into a feared figure in Jewish texts, like the Babylonian Talmud, where she's cast as a demoness with dangerous sexual power. Legends say she could self-fertilize using male essence to provide hundreds of demons, which, frankly, is both horrifying and impressively efficient. But Lilith wasn't always feared. In some traditions, she was actually the first woman made from the same earth as Adam. Trouble was, she didn't exactly love playing second fiddle, so she left the Garden of Eden rather than submit. The patriarchy took it from there. Over time, her story intertwined with vampire lore, Sumerian witchcraft, and multiple cultures, from the Hittites to the Greeks, casting her as a chaotic, sexually charged figure of myth. This is a good spot to point out that oftentimes in history, women characters perceived as evil were frequently characterized as being sexually promiscuous. It's a way for those in powerful positions or those in privileged in-groups, usually men, to establish control while keeping women subservient to them, often utilizing thought-stopping cliches like the Jezebel spirit. I would imagine that someone like Mark Driscoll might have an idea about something like that. Next up, let's talk about your sleep paralysis nightmares, incubi and succubi. These are nocturnal demons who, according to medieval lore, prey on people, particularly during sleep. The incubus is the male version, whose name means to lie upon, which is exactly what he does. The succubus, his seductive counterpart, lies under. Classic patriarchy, always on top. They drain life energy, sometimes everything, from their victims, often leaving them ill, exhausted, or worse. These demons aren't just scary because of their power, but because they mix spiritual terror with themes of guilt, sex, and vulnerability. The succubus even appears in Akkadian and Greek sources, sometimes with wings or bat-like features. Now let's talk about Baphomet, the goat-headed icon you've probably seen on heavy metal albums or edgy tattoos. But Baphomet's origins are actually quite mundane, a mistranslation. A French crusader in 1098 noted Muslims calling upon a deity named Baphomet was probably just a mangled form of Muhammad. Classic medieval Islamophobia. Centuries later, during the persecution of the Knights Templar, Baphomet was invoked again, this time as a mysterious idol. By the 1800s, French occultist Eliphas Levi gave him his famous goat-headed, torch-bearing form. Later, Aleister Crowley associated Baphomet with Satan, wisdom, and rebellion. So, Baphomet became less actual demon and more philosophical statements with horns. From horns to hieroglyphs, let's move to Set, the ancient Egyptian god of chaos, deserts, and storms. He didn't start off as a demon. In fact, he helped the sun god Ra fight chaos monsters in the underworld. But as power shifted and Egypt's mythology evolved, so did Set's reputation. He became the enemy of Horus and was associated with foreign invaders, the ancient version of being cancelled by public opinion. In later periods, he was demonized, but always kept that aura of necessary chaos, because sometimes even the gods need someone to do the dirty work. Now meet Rhonda, the demon queen of Balinese legend. Picture a terrifying figure with bulging eyes, long claws, fangs, and a blood-red tongue. She's been said to eat children, spread disease, and cause general mayhem. So basically the stuff of every parent's worst bedtime story. But even Rhonda has layers. In some traditions, she was once a goddess. And even now, she plays the role of villain in Balinese ritual dances, facing off against the protective spirit, Barong, in an eternal battle of good and evil. Honestly, she might be terrifying, but she's got style. And now to a true theological heavyweight, Beelzebub, a name that translates to Lord of the Flies. Originally a Philistine god, he was rebranded by early Jewish and Christian writers as a prince of demons. Christian theology eventually lumped him with Satan himself, representing sin and corruption, especially gluttony and pride. Medieval grimoires like the Dictionnaire Infernal even gave him the power of flight. So yes, Beelzebub buzzes, both figuratively and literally. This next demon is the weirdest and most cosmic of them all, Yalda Baoth. Known as the demiurge of Gnostic texts, he's not just a demon, he's the being who created the material world. And he did so under a delusion that he was the one true God. Gnostics described him as arrogant, ignorant, and terrifying. Sort of like if your boss built the universe and insisted you worship him for it. He's a lion-faced serpent, surrounded by counterfeit angels, and rules with cosmic narcissism. In Gnostic literature, Yaldabaoth isn't the devil, but he is the reason the world is broken. His most iconic quote, "I am God and there is no other," which, given the context, is both chilling and wildly insecure. Now we're getting to the most iconic demons in Christendom. Let's talk about Lucifer, because the story we think we know is not the story the Bible actually tells. And while most people think of Lucifer and Satan as the same figure, the devil, the reality is far more layered and complicated. Ask most people why Lucifer fell, and you'll probably hear something like, he tried to become God, so he was cast out of heaven. Or maybe in more obscure corners of Abrahamic tradition, you'll hear that he refused to bow to Adam. But these aren't biblical narratives. They're interpretations, layered over centuries of theology, myth, and cross-cultural borrowing. Let's look at what the Bible says. The name Lucifer appears only once in all of Scripture. Just once. It's in the King James Bible in Isaiah 14:12. "How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the dawn! How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low." But here's the critical detail. The passage isn't about the devil. It's a prophetic taunt aimed at the king of Babylon. The Hebrew word being translated here, Halel ben Shakar, literally means shining one, son of the dawn. The name actually comes from the Latin word Lucifer, literally light bringer, or morning star, referring to the planet Venus. In the 4th century Latin Vulgate, this word became Lucifer, a poetic name for the morning star, which was the stand-in name for Venus. It wasn't a proper name at all, just an adjective. In other words, Lucifer wasn't originally an arch-villain. He was a celestial complement. In Greco-Roman culture, this morning star was even personified as a god, sometimes thought to be the son of Aurora, goddess of the dawn. And across ancient mythologies, from Babylonian to Canaanite, we see similar tales of a bright star trying to climb too high, failing, and descending into the underworld. A cosmic metaphor for ambition gone wrong. Over time, this poetic flourish took an identity of its own. In the Old Testament, there's no singular capital D devil. This may be a good time to transition to the most popular demon, Satan. You know, the red guy with the horns and the pitchfork, who somehow manages to rule over fire despite being made of fire. Yeah, that guy. You may even recognize him from earlier this year on South Park as Trump's sensual lover. Turns out the actual biblical Satan is a lot less Marvel villain and a lot more, well, legal department. The Hebrew word Satan just means adversary or accuser. It's a role, not a name. In the book of Job, for instance, the Satan appears in God's court, more like a prosecutor than a cosmic enemy, or someone just being a pain in your side. He's part of the divine council, not a rebel cast out of heaven. He's not storming the gates of heaven. He's literally on the payroll. Think of him less as Darth Vader and more as that one coworker who always points out what you missed in the meeting. In fact, One of the first times we see this word in action is in Numbers 22. Balaam, this prophet for hire, is on a donkey headed toward disaster, and God sends an angel to block his path. And guess what this angel is called? A Satan, an adversary. Yes, that means God's own angel is a Satan in this story. So from the start, it's less evil cosmic rebel and more heavenly opposition team. Now, things start to shift a bit during and after the Babylonian exile. That's when the Israelites are in a foreign territory, surrounded by new ideas and wrestling with deep questions. Why do bad things happen? Where does evil really come from? During this period, the term picks up a little grammatical spice, the definite article. So now it's Ha-Satan, the adversary. In Job 1 and 2, Ha-Satan is part of God's heavenly council. He doesn't sneak in. He doesn't rebel. He literally walks into the throne room and has a conversation with God like it's a staff meeting. God's like, "What have you been up to?" And Satan says, "Oh, just roaming the earth, doing my thing." And then they make a wager about Job's faithfulness. It's unsettling, sure, but Satan here is more like heaven's tough cop than a rogue angel. Same thing in Zechariah 3. Ha-Satan shows up in a divine courtroom scene, accusing the high priest Joshua. Again, prosecutor, not pitchfork. Now here's where it gets interesting. 1 Chronicles 21:1. It says, Satan stood up against Israel and incited David to take a census. Now, wait a second. That same story shows up earlier in 2 Samuel 24:1. But there it says God incited David to take a census. So, what happened? Well, the author of Chronicles, writing later, probably went, maybe let's not say God tempted someone to sin. Let's shift that blame. So, suddenly, Satan, possibly for the first time, gets cast as a source of temptation. That moment might be the birth of Satan as a standalone character in the Hebrew Bible. Now, this theological evolution didn't happen in a vacuum. During the exile, Israel was under Persian rule, and Persia brought some big theological ideas with it. In Zoroastrianism, the dominant religion at the time, the universe is locked in a cosmic battle between Ahura Mazda, the god of light, and Angra Mainyu, the spirit of destruction. Good God versus evil God. And those ideas absolutely left fingerprints on Jewish thought. Instead of God's employee, he became God's rival. Then, by the New Testament, he's cast as a devil or slanderer, or the great tempter, diabolos in Greek, ha-Satan in Hebrew, testing Jesus in the wilderness, waging war in Revelation, and finally hurled into the lake of fire. In the Quran, written in the 7th century CE, we meet Iblis, the Islamic counterpart to Satan. And here, finally, we get an origin story. When God creates Adam, he commands the angels to bow. Everyone obeys, except Iblis. His reasoning? I'm better than him. You made me from fire and him from clay. That's from the Quran 7:12. It's not just pride, It's classism on a cosmic scale. Fire versus clay. And for that, he's cast out. The story shows up multiple times in the Quran, hammering home the point. Rebellion here is really about superiority, disobedience, and refusing God's order. But here's the kicker. This storyline isn't brand new. A very similar tale shows up earlier in Jewish apocryphal writings like the life of Adam and Eve from around the 3rd century CE. In that version, Satan himself says to Adam, "Because of you, I was cast out of heaven. God told me to bow, and I refused." The resentment practically drips off the page. It's not just rebellion, it's rivalry. During the Second Temple period, we get texts like 1st Enoch, which go full apocalyptic. Suddenly, there's a whole cast of rebellious angels. Azazel, Shemihazah, and Mastema. Satan appears too, but sometimes as one among many. Sometimes it's a role, sometimes it's a class. Satans, plural. A whole HR department of adversaries. By the time the Hebrew Bible gets translated into Greek, the Septuagint, we see another shift. The word Satan is often translated as diabolos, which means slanderer or accuser. That's where we get the word devil. It's not a perfect match, but it's the best translators could do. Then we hit the New Testament, and now Satan is ready for the spotlight. No longer just Ha-Satan, the adversary, but Satan, capital S, a proper name. The tempter in the wilderness, the one sowing weeds in God's field. Now Satan's got a resume. Head of demonic forces, enemy of God, CEO of Hell Inc. And that's all going right on his LinkedIn profile. In Luke 10:18, Jesus says, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." That's it. Blink and you'll miss it. No backstory, no fiery monologue, just a line that's more poetry than plot. Over the centuries, the devil's role only grew. In the early modern era, fears of demonic possession made him a central figure of Christian imagination. In the Enlightenment, thinkers like Voltaire mock the idea of him. And in modern times, interpretations split widely, from Satan as a literal enemy of God to Satan as a symbol of freedom in movements like Levian Satanism. Early Christians often pictured redemption like a ransom deal. Humanity had, in a sense, been pawned off to Satan, the so-called God of this world. So Christ's death was imagined as the payment that brought us back. But some theologians weren't thrilled with the idea of God politely settling accounts with the devil. Gregory of Nyssa, for instance, reframed it as a divine bait and switch. Jesus' humanity was the bait, his hidden divinity as the hook. Satan thought he'd nab just another mortal, only to find he'd swallowed something far more than he could chew. In the end, the devil got hustled, and salvation was the greatest trick ever played on him. And while the Bible itself never describes Satan's appearance, centuries of Christian art filled in the gaps. Horns, goat legs, pitchfork, basically a mashup of pagan gods like Pan and Poseidon, a kind of theological collage gone Halloween costume. So, what does all this mean? It means Satan didn't show up fully formed. He evolved from a legal term to a cosmic role to a mythic personality. And that evolution tracks with everything the people of Israel were going through: exile, oppression, influence from empires, and deep theological struggle. So when we zoom out, we see three major traditions: Jewish, Christian, Islamic, all weaving variations on the same cosmic conflict. But none of them hand us the full devil origin story neatly packaged. That comes through centuries of retelling, commentary, and theological imagination. In the end, Satan became a kind of theological scapegoat, a way to explain evil without putting it all on God. And over time, as new empires rose, new theologies took root, and new fears took shape. Satan morphed into the character we know today. Not so much a villain who fell from heaven, but one we built, brick by brick, story by story. A question that interests me is, what will the personification of the devil look like in 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years from now, given that humanity even makes it that far? And maybe that's the most interesting part. Lucifer, Satan, Iblis, etc. They aren't static villains, they're mirrors, reflecting whatever a culture most fears: disobedience, arrogance, hierarchy turned upside down. So maybe the real question isn't who fell from heaven, but why do we keep needing someone or something to fall in the first place?